For those of you who are watching us live, welcome. And so we're doing a midweek meeting, and we're going to be touching on some subjects that I don't typically touch on Sabbath. That is a time for me where I like to put away all secular papers, secular themes, and really devote myself to higher spiritual advancement. So typically I won't touch at length on these subjects, but it's not to say that these are not important subjects, because they are very important, and we should be aware of them, as we don't want to be ignorant of the time in which we're living, which we find ourselves, and how critical it is. We need to get ready. We need to be ready, and we need to stay ready. And when we understand the nearness of the times and the rapidity of events that are all around us, and as we're watching the trend of events, and as we're becoming more acquainted with the scriptures and making God's word our meditation continually, the experience is such that we will find ourselves, as we see the unfolding of events here on the earth, and then we see sort of a quick change in trajectory where things just seem to stop. It's as though the veil is drawn back, and we can see our high priest pleading to hold the winds until the servants of God are sealed in their foreheads. So when we look at the delays, like when you look at the hostility that was taking place with the coronavirus, and the kind of measures that were being enacted, unjustly so, and the rapidity with which things were changing, and how quickly that could have become a cashless situation because of contact and what have you, we could see how quickly things could have ended just in that short space of time. And yet our high priest is praying for us over and over and over in this great hour of judgment. So we want to be aware of his movements as our high priest in the heavenly sanctuary at the right hand of the Father, as he is relating to him and pleading. There is a time appointed where mercy can be no more. The angel of mercy will take its flight, and the judgments will be let loose upon the earth, and great destruction shall fall upon the inhabitants of the earth. So we want to be prepared. We want to be under the shelter of the Most High, and we certainly don't want to let these things overtake us as a thief. There is a class, of course, that this will overtake them as a thief, and they are the sons of darkness. We want to be the children of light and not be in darkness, not be unaware of those things, but savoring the light more than the darkness. It's very important that we're savoring those things above the other. Now, I entitled this presentation "The Sunday Law and Spiritualism" because there are some increasing developments that I think really need our attention right now. I don't typically do a midweek kind of podcast or more of an informal kind of presentation, but I felt that it was needful. So I spent the last day or so preparing about 2 presentations on subjects that I feel are necessary to kind of get us up to speed. It's not exhaustive, but it could be. I can be quite exhausting at times, but there is much more to what's going on when you look at the subject in Russia and the war that's going on in Russia and Ukraine, and you look at what's going on with Israel and Islam, and you see this war going on, and then you see economic crises and the push for the Great Reset, and the digital economy and artificial intelligence. All of these things are really a construct in and of itself that is building into this new kind of generation that is going to be essentially a kind of dark ages such as the world has never seen before. And we're going to see totalitarian systems such as has never been on the face of the earth. So we're going to see vast and unmeasured kinds of oppression. We already see a great detachment. It's startling, but it shouldn't surprise us, I suppose, that and I don't want to make any kind of disparaging remarks about governments or any kind of, people generally for whom Christ has died. At the same time, there is a great hardness of heart and detachment and great lack of sympathy for those who are about to go through tremendous suffering to push through the kind of reset that the rich and wealthy class are so eager to push the button on. When they want to push the reset, they realize it's going to cause suffering. They say it in their interviews. I watched a presentation from the World Governance Summit, if I remember that correctly, or it was Global Governance Summit. Anyway, when I was watching this, they were talking about all of the kinds of reforms that will be needed in this coming Great Reset. And as they were looking at these things, this woman was saying, there's going to be hardship. It's going to be difficult to transition to a digital economy, to get into zero carbon emissions, and to get to all of these goals that they seem to have. Is actually alarming, and they say it will be difficult. We're going to go through some really hard times, but it'll be worth it. We need to get through it. And it's like, yeah, you're going to go through tremendously hard times when you are, one of the world's, top 5% wealthy, and right. I'm sure it's going to be a great struggle for you. They're talking about inflation and all of these things that are taking place right now, and having to reset the economy it's a pretty serious thing, right? It's not nothing to allow the economies to collapse and just to reintroduce a kind of digital, ultra monitored, new kind of monetary system, which has to happen at this time. When we look at the clock of various monetary reforms, we know that happens about every 40 years. And so they went from the gold standard to debt notes, over time. And so this has kind of happened for quite some time in the United States. And the clock is ticking, the inflation is growing, and yeah, we've reached about the 40-year mark. I have a friend. He was a banker and an economist, and he has some very peculiar insights into some of these things. I told him to write a blog because his insights are, I would say, very peculiar, and you can see how he has his mind in patterns. And of course, God works in patterns with cycles of sevens. He sees this. He sees cycles where things seem to happen over and over again. But in a biblical context anyway. So he said, there actually is, unbeknownst to people, there's a sort of a change in the monetary system about every 40 years or so. So I thought that's quite, and he delineated that for me, and I couldn't do it justice to repeat it to you. I'd have to get him to write it down, and then I could share it with you. But he broke it down very well. So I don't claim to be, of course, an economist or a banker, so probably not my field of expertise. So we do want to look at some of these things, because I did see a video concerning the G7 that interested me, and I think it will interest you as well. I actually have two videos. Now, when we talk about spiritualism and the world elites and the coming global reset, and basically all of these various moving parts that are going on, there's so much here that it's difficult. One presentation cannot get it all. 2 presentations can't get it all. 10 presentations couldn't get it all. There's so many different pieces to this. and really you could do a whole series, and then there's still really a vast ocean. This is a real bottomless pit, this subject. So how deep do you want to go? We will go, we will do probably 2 presentations, because I don't want to go too deep into this, but we will go enough. And you know what, if people like this kind of sort of midweek update, we can continue. And it will be less formal. The presentations on Sabbath maybe a little bit more formal. I'm going to just talk and just be kind of normal as I'm going from day to day, and speak about some of the issues that are on my heart, and for these presentations. So you'll see that I'm just going to be a little bit more free that way. So we're going to be looking at the Catholic Church, obviously, right? And then we're going to be looking at the high political sphere, the coming global governance, the biggest global government that the world has ever seen. Now, Nebuchadnezzar's government was quite extensive. Medo-Persia was more extensive. Greece was far more extensive. And Rome, at its height, was also incredibly, east and west. It was very, very extensive. But yet, as how all these governments had sort of an expansive tendency, these world governments, and yet the last one that is detailed in prophecy is greater than them all. So, and that's happening. It's right before our eyes. It's right in front of our faces, and I think we need to understand this in the light of Bible prophecy. So we'll look at that today, and look at a number of videos. We're going to look at the subject of the 3 world wars. We're going to look at World War III. World War III is pretty well upon us. We are just about here. When you look at the past 2 world wars, you look at, there were a lot of moving parts that led to the big World War I and World War II. And then causing this kind of chaos produced a reaction for which a solution was provided. That's Hegelian dialectic, right? That is what they do. And so what we see based on what had happened, there was years before the world wars started, there were lots of little pieces that were in place to kind of aggravate and to develop that into the sort of the monster warfare that it became. And it was intentionally done, and it was incredibly, meticulously well planned. We're going to see that today. But what's going on over here in Israel and in Russia and Ukraine and all these different things, this is all meticulously planned to get the whole world involved in a vast crisis, and to kind of submerge and to bring about a very specific end, I might add. Not one end, but several. The last 2 world wars created several different effects, and I wrote an article. You can actually look at that article. On my page, I put it in a comment on one of my posts, just like the last 2 posts or something. Anyway, and it talks about the Hegelian dialectic and how that was at work in the world wars, and we're going to look at some of those things today, but definitely not to that extent on that point of view. We're going to look more at what's going on in relation to this global governance situation in the light of the 3 world wars. So yes, World War III is pretty much here. And as unpleasant as that might sound for people, we need to be sure about where we are, if we're conscientious objectors, or if not, we need to be sure where we're standing on a lot of different issues, because time is going to get increasingly stricter in respect to spiritual demands upon us. And so the way is going to be getting narrower and narrower. Things are just going to have to, by necessity, fall off. And that includes social media. There's going to be a point in time where people are going to look to and fro after the close of probation. They're not going to be able to find the words of God because everything has been so repressed. The internet is going to become so controlled. The economy is so run down that the proliferation of information that we have enjoyed in sort of this time of enlightenment is going to be increasingly bottlenecked, so that you can't get that anymore. So we have to avail ourselves as we have the opportunity, and we're going to find that these things, we're going to have to migrate from all of these things eventually. So and really the last field of missionary work is going to be the medical missionary field. And if you're going to be a missionary at the end, you gotta be doing that. It means there's going to be a lot of sick people. There's going to be a lot of very, very deep affliction on the health event. And you can see, just based on, I mean, not just what they're feeding, but what they're putting in the air. Not just what they're putting in the air, but the clothes that everybody wears, the polyester and the, you know, we have synthetic fabrics, and then we brush our teeth with chemicals, we wash our mouth with chemicals, we wash our bodies and wash our hair with chemicals. You know, it's just everything. We're so inundated with all kinds of things that will absolutely destroy health and cause disease to become so rife in society. So, you know, I see on YouTube, a lot of YouTubers are dying of cancer. Well, why do you think they're dying of cancer? You've got 5G, right? You've got these people, they're wearing these mics all the time. You've got so much radiation going on. You're just bombarded with these things. You've got your cell phone on you, your smartphone, and it's constantly on you, probably always connected. And if it's connected to, God forbid, 5G, because it's a 5G enabled device, what are you going to do? Right? And so you see a lot of YouTubers right now, very prominent. They got huge, and then their hugest videos are their cancer announcements, where they're dying and it's terminal, and they die, and then they don't post anything else. Maybe somebody takes up their channel. But this is not an isolated instance. This is very, very common. So, of course, when you surround yourself with all of these things and you say, well, you're talking to us now and you're probably using the internet, and you're right. And, but it's ideal to, you know, to turn those things off and to separate ourselves, to get, take a screen-free day. Probably wouldn't hurt us, right? Actually wouldn't hurt us at all, in 99% of the cases. So yeah, wild time that we're living in. So, but we're going to look at this. We're going to look at the subject of spiritualism in respect to the highest governments of the world, and the Sunday law. I'm sure that you all know what the Sunday law is, in the context of the world powers. It's certainly not the seal of God. The seal of God that he says to bind the law on the forehead and in the hand, right? It shall be a sign. And of course, a false Christian church has a false sign because they have a false law, and they're established not in a heavenly kingdom, but an earthly kingdom, right? Because they're earthly and not heavenly. And so when we look at the Catholic Church, actually, let's pray. I want to pray because I don't want to get too far into this without prayer. But then after we pray, then we can continue what I was going to say. Merciful, loving Father, we want to ask that your Holy Spirit will be with us. You are the most holy God in the Holy of Holies. And Father, you are preparing a people to stand in the great day of the coming of your Son. We want to be made ready. We want to be able to stand firm against the advances of spiritualism. We don't want to be overtaken by the Prince of Darkness or by his specious devices. And we don't want to be swept up into falsehood, in error, in darkness. And we don't want to be earthly, but we want to be heavenly minded. So even as we're looking at these things, Father, I'm asking that you will please send your Holy Spirit, enlighten our understanding, bring us conviction as to the lateness of the time. And Father, be with me as I speak, that these subjects that are spoken about can be to your honor and glory. You are wonderful and high and holy, And Father, you desire holy children, so please, Father, help us as we look at the holy themes in relation to these very dark themes. Help the holy themes to have its sanctifying power, and help us, Father, to see these matters as you see them, and to love righteousness with your own love, heart of your own heart, and Father, to also hate iniquity with the hate that you have, because it separates men from you. We thank you so much, Father, for all you do. In the name of your beloved Son, Yeshua. Amen. All right, so when we look at the Catholic Church, you have the Catholic social doctrine. And the Catholic social doctrine, also known as the Catholic social teaching, it's basically a body of doctrine that's been developed by the Catholic Church on pretty much every possible conceivable matter that deals with everybody's relation between God and the Catholic Church, and to their fellow men, to workers' rights, to wages, to holidays, to just about literally like all the various nuances of the Catholic Church as it relates to anything earthly, and how they're supposed to relate socially, politically, right? So, I mean, this gets in the social doctrine gets into the subject of poverty and wealth and economics and global wealth redistribution and all kinds of weird things, social organization and the role of the state in relation to the church, and you have the defining of the position of man and how man was made, and right, and his relation to all of these different things. And then you have this subject of the common good. You probably heard about the common good before, right? That's the Catholic social teaching. And this is an incredibly nuanced body of law that you cannot, I mean, it's so deep, but it's so deep that you can get lost in all of the stuff and you miss all of the details in the implications, or you get lost in the details and you miss the logical implications of how evil these things could actually be. Not to say that they're all evil, I wouldn't say that, but there's certainly things there which are very alarming in relation to the political sphere. And so it says that the common good, I have this definition here, deals with how society should be organized, how it should be functioned, how it should function, and how the church should relate to society, state, economy, and the environment. So you have things like that, and then you have the ecumenical pursuits. They're also part of the social doctrine, so it just gets very work, trade, unions, stewardship, governments, legislative pursuits, whatever. It's got all kinds of messy things when you get into this. And so when you look at the social doctrine, you can actually see, if you want to know some of the themes we're going to look at, it's all tabbed up here. Shouldn't cheat, but you can look, I guess. So this is the compendium of the social doctrine of the church, and this document is so long. Look at how long this is. I'm just scrolling down, and I'm scrolling, and I'm scrolling, and I'm scrolling, and I don't know, this is like bigger than the book of Isaiah by far. This is probably as big as the Bible. It's so big. Anyway, and it deals with all kinds of, right, building the civilization of love, and it's talking about, of course, just things of, right, how the church is to relate to each other, and it's all given in very nice, goodly words, I guess. There's a service in the economy, service in politics, right? And you just have service in culture, service to the human person in various sectors of social life, lay associations and social doctrine, right? And it's just like everything here. There's all kinds of things. This gets really, really deep. And it's actually kind of alarming. I did highlight some things, and I'm totally unsure if I'm even going to be able to find it in this ocean of verbose passages that you have here. It's really the common responsibility, the environment, a collective good, or a common good, they call it, right? The use of biotechnology, I mean, it's defining everything, right? It's defining how you breathe. It's just a lot of things. And safeguarding the environment, foreign debt, the fight against poverty, international cooperation for development, right? Just judicial personality of the Vatican, the organization of the international community, and just lots of stuff. Now, let me see if I can actually find the points that I highlighted for you guys, if I can. Okay, I think inflicting punishment, this is good. This is really interesting. I decided not to go into all these things because a lot of these things are very pacific in tone. They're not very, they're worded in a way to kind of appeal to the modern generation. Whereas when you look at the Dark Ages was a little bit more overt in how oppressive it could be. Now, inflicting punishment, it says, in order to protect the common good, the lawful public authority must exercise the right and duty to inflict punishments according to the seriousness of the crimes committed. Now, well, it makes sense that there should be civil laws, right? But there is this whole thing about the common good. And the common good is basically, it says it's to save the order, okay? The order of society, okay? It's the political order. Now, when you look at the order that they're talking about, let's look at what it says. Authority as moral force. It says authority must be guided by the moral law. Now, you know their law, and when they say moral law, they're understanding something different, because their understanding of the Ten Commandments is that it's changeable, it's shifting, and the man has authority to change that which is holy for a common day, right? You see that with all of these days, with Christmas, with Easter, with All Saints' Day, with White Sunday, with just every weekly Sunday. So you know that they think of themselves as having so high authority as to be able to change the government of heaven and to rearrange it, because they bind the things that are in heaven in their idea of matters. They could even bind God himself and change the law of his throne. So they say this: authority must be guided by the moral law. All of its dignity derives from its being exercised within the context of moral order. Remember about the order we just said about afflicting according to the common good? Which in turn has God for its first source and final end. So it says, like, listen, everything that we're doing with authority needs to start with God, and it goes back to God. And if there's anything where it's not God, it's the church's duty to bring it back to God, right? So the Catholic Church's, its mission is to convert and to make disciples of all nations. It literally means to convert the kingdoms of the world. It's really taking that verse into a place that Christ never intended, because he never intended to reign over the kingdoms of this world, as the papacy does in its temporal doctrine. Now it says, it is from the moral order that authority derives its power to impose obligations and its moral legitimacy. And it is to translate this order into concrete actions to achieve the common good, and to punish people if they're not according to and in line with the common good. Another one, authority that governs according to reason places citizens in relationship not so much of subjection to another person as of obedience to the moral order, and therefore to God himself, who is its ultimate source. Okay, and I mean, there's just so much stuff here when you look at this, and this is under the section of political authority. There's really, really a lot of different things here, talking about how it must be ordered, right? And the kind of legislation that it should have, and how man is to relate to the political sphere, the political arena. So this is, just for an example, looking after the common good means making use of the new opportunities for the redistribution of wealth. So, okay, I do understand. The idea is that the rich are supposed to give to the poor, and the poor are supposed to receive from the rich, and that's the whole basis of this of the basic universal basic income. And that's a big part of the social doctrine of the church, and globalization. All right? Globalization is the process of interconnecting every other part so that it becomes so interconnected that you even have globalization with respect to politics. And whoever rules in globalization, in matters of globalization, basically rules the world. So, and then there's this last one I want to look at in this page, and then I'm going to go into the presentation itself. And this statement is actually read quite often, but I'm sure you've heard this. This one is rest from work, okay? And it says public authorities have the duty, this is politicians, right? They have the duty to ensure that for reasons of economic productivity, citizens are not denied time for rest and divine worship. So, okay, they are mandated to make sure that they should do that. But this goes further. It's not just any time for rest and divine worship, because divine worship for them only constitutes the holy days of obligation in the Catholic Church. That's the only thing that can constitute divine worship, really. Employers have an analogous obligation regarding their employees. Christians, in respect of religious freedom, look at this, and of the common good of all, that means even if you're not Catholic, should seek to have Sundays and the church's holy days recognized as legal holidays. That means, if that's the common good of all, that means that they should legislate it. Not only should they legislate it, but according to this very document, that government should be morally ordered according to it, and you must be punished if you don't abide by those rules, by those times of rest and divine worship. Okay, that's intrinsically part of the Catholic doctrine and the Catholic Church. You cannot break away from it. Not a single Catholic can break away from it. If you're Catholic and you're watching this and you look at this, please understand this is the doctrine of your church. You can't get around it. Now, I want to show you some videos here, particularly as it pertains to the G7. Now, actually, let me bring back the screen I was just at. Let's go here to the, okay, so probably two presentations, I think. We're going to get into a Sunday Law Update. We're going to look at the 3 World Wars, as I already said. We're going to look at the United Nations in Bible prophecy and the origin of the United Nations. It's all going to be kind of mishmash, not necessarily in this order. We're going to look at the significance of 2025. You know, there's Project 25, but also in spiritualism, it's a very significant date. And a lot of events have been happening over the last, I don't know, 75 years or so. No, maybe about 60 years. There's been a lot of things happening that people are unaware of that should draw back the veil as to the principalities and powers and what is going on in relation to the present time, that we find ourselves in a very serious time of transition, and the world's elites, they know it. They're very cognizant of it, and we shouldn't be surprised about that. Now, I just want to look at, before I get into these videos, I want you to understand how extensive and how important the G7 is in this world. Now, the G7 is this is according to a fact sheet that was released by the Bureau of European and Canadian Affairs and the U.S. Department of State. And this was released in 1997. And talks about the G7, and of course the G7 primarily 7 different countries that are quite large, having huge authority in this world. And then there is an 8th, which is actually the leader of the European Union, the president of the European Union, which is absolutely massive, but because of the nature of the G7, it can't, even though she's representing all of the European Union, can't actually be there necessarily. But you can see that there are 8 flags there. Since the commencement of the G7, the heads of state or government have met annually to address the major economic and political issues facing their nations and the international community. The annual summit provides an important occasion for leaders to discuss major international issues and to respond effectively to potential threats to the international system. The leaders also give direction to the international community by setting priorities, forging common policies, or establishing patterns of cooperation on transnational challenges, and providing guidance to established international organizations. So let me put some videos on so you can understand exactly where we're going with this. And hopefully you'll be able to hear me through this, but I'm going to put it on so you can see the significance of what's going on in the G7 this June. You see here.
In an unprecedented move, Pope Francis will attend the G7 Summit, a political and economic forum that brings together leaders from some of the world's most advanced countries. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni says this is the first time in history that a pope has attended the G7 meetings.
E io sono convinta che la presenza di Sua Santità darà un contributo decisivo alla definizione di un quadro regolatorio, etico e culturale all'intelligenza artificiale, perché su questo terreno, sul presente e sul futuro di questa tecnologia, si misurerà ancora una volta la nostra capacità, la capacità della comunità internazionale di fare quello che il 2 ottobre del 1979 un altro Papa, San Giovanni Paolo II, ricordava nel suo celebre discorso alle Nazioni Unite. L'attività politica, nazionale e internazionale, viene dall'uomo, si esercita mediante l'uomo ed è per l'uomo.
The meetings will take place in the southern Italian region of Puglia from June 13th to 15th and will include leaders from the United States, France, Germany, Japan, Italy, Canada, and Britain. Pope Francis will join a session dedicated to artificial intelligence that is open to other countries, not just those in G7.
All right, so just before that, clearly Pope Francis is being invited to the G7. Hugely influential political governments of this world. We're going to see another video here in a moment and a proposal that is happening. We know that in Rome and in Italy they have work-free Earth Sabbath, and so this is something that Sundays are much more respected. In Portugal here, like everything is closed. It's pretty terrible actually. Literally on every holiday, I don't know, there must be like 50 holidays throughout the whole year, and they're just, everything is closed, and you never know what day everything is going to be closed, because it's like St. Anthony Day and everything is closed here in Portugal. Well, it's also that way in Germany as well. So the European countries are much more far along, further developed in the Sunday law question. But now look at this, because we're talking about America, we're talking about the United States, we're talking about Japan, we're talking about big countries beyond that. So let's see this video, which I think is an interesting proposal that's being made, and I think it's gaining traction.
The 2024 G7 Summit in Italy promises to be a pivotal event in shaping a more sustainable future for our planet. As the world's leading economies gather, the agenda will focus on critical issues such as economic resilience, security, and ethical AI development. The esteemed participation of Pope Francis will lend a moral voice to discussions on ethical AI development and global cooperation. Italy's diplomatic efforts will advocate for a ceasefire in Gaza and a reduction of tensions in the Middle East conflict. Italy is pushing for an ambitious coal phase-out by 2025, demonstrating its commitment to sustainable energy and environmental stewardship. The Italian presidency will prioritise the defence of the rules-based international system and engagement with developing nations and emerging economies. The summit's agenda will cover critical topics like stability in the Indo-Pacific region, cybersecurity, and the responsible development of artificial intelligence. One of the most significant proposals should be the introduction of a weekly Earth Sabbath to combat climate change. One of the most significant proposals should be the introduction of a weekly Earth Sabbath to combat climate change and promote environmental stewardship. The weekly Earth Sabbath aims to establish a global day of rest and reflection. The weekly Earth Sabbath aims to establish a global day of rest and reflection on environmental sustainability, raising awareness, and inspiring collective action. By championing the weekly Earth Sabbath, Italy would position itself as a leader in international diplomacy and environmental sustainability on the global stage. The 2024 G7 Summit and the weekly Earth Sabbath proposal could present a unique opportunity to address pressing global challenges and foster international cooperation. We need protesters in Italy to act now as a voice for a weekly Earth Sabbath. By bringing together world leaders and engaging the global community, this summit has the power to drive meaningful change and shape a sustainable future. The 2024 G7 Summit in Italy represents a pivotal moment in our collective journey towards a better tomorrow for generations to come. Visit www.earthsabbath.world.
All right, so I just wanted to share that because I thought that was quite interesting. Of course, very strong proposal as far as what should be done. And you can see the kind of the earnestness to bring that out. Now, Italy, of course, already has at least somewhat of this, and Rome has been particular in advocating for these ideas. So it's coming from there, of course, where the heart of it is the Vatican. Wouldn't really surprise one at all. Now, so when we look at the G7, I think it's quite important that we understand that when these leaders gather, and that there is the papacy gathering and lending the voice of moral authority for what? Right? What does the Catholic Church have to do with artificial intelligence or the economy, for that matter, or any of these things, but yet, or politics, and yet somehow this is being given sort of front and center in as Rome Reports said, an unprecedented act from the Pope. It's really, really something that he would even be given an invitation to partake in these meetings. All right, so now, when we look at the papacy, it shouldn't surprise us that the papacy, and when we look at the subject of Sunday laws and Earth Sabbaths and these things, that the papacy is all about these things because it has been invested and is prophetically defined as changing the times of God's law. Daniel 7, verse 25, it says that this is the papacy. It's depicted as the little horn power. He shall speak great words against the Most High, shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. Well, if it's great words against the Most High and wearing out the saints of the Most High, it's also understandable that the times and laws that he thinks to change are the laws and the times of the Most High. And they, that is the saints, shall be given into his hands for a time, times, and a dividing of time. Revelation, so definitely changing, of course, all of the holy days. We're going to look at a few statements on that, not too much, but we're going to look at something. Revelation 13, verse 3, speaking about the papacy again, says, I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And look how extensive this is in influence. And all the world wondered after the beast. You know what I'm seeing right now? It's very interesting. You have celebrities like Russell Brand. He just converted to Catholicism. Then you have Candace Owen, and you have just a number of people right now. You have Jonathan, the guy from The Chosen. Name's not coming to me now. I know his name it'll come into my mind, and then it's going to be like, aha. But anyway, the one the actor that plays Jesus, he is a hardcore Catholic, and I saw just an ad on my. I don't watch the show. I'm actually quite repulsed by it because it's taking the holy things of Scripture and it's mingling it in such a profane way and changing it and shaking it up and doing all kinds of things with it that are so many artistic license. And I said, we shouldn't be putting our graving tool on the altar. And that's exactly what this series does. And everybody says, no, it's just a series. We don't take it to be biblical. Well, why you watch it? For what purpose? You think it's going to be edifying? Well, no, you don't think it's edifying. It's just for entertainment purposes? I don't understand. Maybe you can comment me if you can help me to understand why we need that kind of entertainment. I don't know. Revelation 18 verse 3 tells us, for all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. This is also the papacy, right? And it says, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. So, several things here. Now, the abundance of her delicacies, you look at all of her doctrines, right? All of her dainties, all of the leavened concepts that are full of everything that seem to favor doing certain things for certain classes of people. The merchants of the earth, of course, is speaking about the economies and economic powers and the businesses that will excel through this idea of basic universal income and global wealth distribution and all these things that are being dabbled into in the financial sector by the Catholic Church. So all the world wonders after the beast, not some of the world. And so you see celebrities right now. There's a huge Renaissance period going on for the Catholic Church right now. So where they are becoming more in for everyone. And even you have the likes of people like Richard Dawkins saying that there needs to be moral authority and that he appreciates the Judeo-Christian values of America and doesn't think that there should be this savagery and atheism. Anyway, we'll look at that also in a moment. Now it tells us how extensive this is. All the world has wondered after the beast. All nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. That's how extensive her influence is. It reaches to all nations and the kings of those nations. Okay? So it's church and state and dealing with the economy, the power of buying and selling. Now, we're told very clearly, when you think about the inhabitants of the earth, and they're made drunk with the wine of her fornication. When you look at Proverbs 31, verse 4 and 5, it says, it's not for kings, O Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes strong drink, lest they drink and forget the law and pervert the judgment of any of the afflicted. Now we're told that Babylon, the great, the mother of harlots, has a golden cup in her hand, and that by that cup she's drunk with the blood of the martyrs. And not only is she drunk with the blood of the martyrs, but she's making drunk all the nations so that they're also drunk with the blood of the martyrs, so that all the world shall become guilty before God and every mouth will be stopped. Now, it says, lest they drink and forget the law, and then they begin to oppress and afflict, right? They pervert the judgment of the afflicted. So they're forgetting the law because of the wine. And they're forgetting the ways of righteousness and the paths of righteousness because of the wine. We're told that priests aren't even supposed to drink wine, especially when they have kind of holy orders or anything. So when you look at the Catholic Church, they're drinking wine every single day, right? They have a Mass every single day. The Catholic Church does. And so the fact that they have these Masses continually means that they're drinking this fermented wine all the time. And Leviticus 10 verses 9 through 11 says, "Do not drink wine nor strong drink, you nor your sons with you, when you go into the tabernacle of the congregation, lest you die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, that you may put a difference between the holy and the unholy, between the unclean and the clean, and that you may teach the children of Israel all the statutes which the Lord has spoken unto them by the hand of Moses." Now, that word for tabernacle there is very interesting. It's ohel, okay? It means a tent, or it means a tabernacle or a tent. And that's the Hebrew word ohel. And then ohel moed is actually what it's called. Now, moed means an appointed time. It can also mean a time in which people gather together. But the literal Hebraic translation of this would be the tabernacle of time. That's what it is. It's the tabernacle of time. And so it says, listen, don't drink wine when you come into the tabernacle of time, right? Make sure that you make a difference between the common days and the holy days and the holy work and the unholy work, right? When you come in during evening and morning for your ministrations in the sanctuary, don't be drinking. Right? Don't be made drunk. What about the drunkenness doctrinally that the Catholic Church is getting people to embrace, so that they're not making a difference between what God has pronounced holy and what is common and profane and not holy and common? Or what about those who now disregard by the doctrine the distinguishing between clean and unclean, and they fill their vessels, their bodies, with all kinds of unclean things, right? To the degree that the Catholic Church is filled with every unclean and hateful bird. We look at the Catholic Church again, all the world wondering after the beast. It says that he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. Again, if he's blaspheming the tabernacle, it's the tabernacle of time. The heavenly tabernacle is also the tabernacle of time, right? Where we come to offer to God worship, evening and morning sacrifice. You have your daily sacrifice, your Sabbath sacrifice, your new moon sacrifice, and your yearly holiday sacrifice, right, with the feasts. So very alarming, because God sanctified these things and allowed these to be times where we could approach him through Christ. We could come into his presence, and the gates of heaven would be opened. Large outpourings of his Spirit would be poured out. The blood of the Lamb was poured out during this time, and signifying that the life of the Lamb can be poured out upon us in these seasons. And yet, because of the wine of fornication, everybody's missing the blessing. Now, when we look at the blaspheming of the tabernacle of time, remember it said in Leviticus that you may put a difference between the holy and the unholy, between the unclean and the clean, and that you may teach the children of Israel all the statutes which the Lord has spoken unto them by the hand of Moses. Now, this is from John Bagshaw. It's called The Threshold of the Catholic Church, a course of plain instructions for those entering our communion. Of course, it is... he is like a reverend of sorts. That's what they call him, even though that title belongs to God. But anyway, he is very much associated with the Catholic Church. And this is what he says. He says, the new law has its own spirit, its own sacrifice, and its own feasts, which have taken the place of those appointed in the law of Moses. You know, I see a lot of Adventists and a lot of evangelicals saying very similar words to this. If we would know the days to be observed, or the regulation about them, or the spirit in which they are to be kept holy, we must go to the Catholic Church, not to the Mosaic law. Well, you can't teach right? All the statutes which the Lord has spoken by the hand of Moses, and you can't distinguish between the holy and the unholy if you're getting rid of what God has pronounced holy. The church tells us to keep Sunday holy instead of Saturday, and to keep it in a Christian and not a Jewish manner. It also tells us that as in the old law there were many feasts of just as much obligation as the Sabbath, so there are feasts in the new law, which from the authority of the church are to be kept holy, just as Sundays are. These are called holidays of obligation. The number of these holidays vary in different countries and at different times according to the discretion of the church. They just change it around, they mishmash it, they do whatever seems convenient for the general culture and population and their popularity, I guess. Because we say, well, we're not going to keep this feast here because that wouldn't give them a whole lot of favor. But here in Portugal, that's what I told you, that 50 days a week or a year, places are closed for like just some random saints that nobody knows. So it's and it's sometimes a little difficult because you're going out, you're doing your shopping, and then wow, it's closed, So because the Catholic Church is where Fatima happened. Fatima was the apparition of what they think is the Virgin Mary, the devil in disguise. And what ends up happening as a result is that it becomes very, 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 very Catholic. Now, speaks blasphemous words against the tabernacle of time, drinks wine, makes the nations drunk with that same wine. He says, of course, the Catholic Church claims the change was her act. The act is a mark of her ecclesiastical power and authority in religious matters, speaking regarding the Sabbath. Okay, that was Chancellor, C.F. Thomas, Chancellor of Cardinal Gibbons. And so he's actually answering a letter regarding the change of the Sabbath. That was in 1895. Now, again, it says, it was the Catholic Church that made the law obliging us to keep Sunday holy. The Church made this law long after the Bible was written, hence said law is not in the Bible. The Catholic Church abolished not only the Sabbath, but all other Jewish festivals. Thinks to change times, plural, and laws. Catholic record, Sunday is our mark of authority. The Church is above the Bible, and the transference of the Sabbath observance is proof of this fact. Remember, when God gave that law to Moses, he said that it will be a sign on your forehead and your hand. He said the Passover as well. When you keep the Passover, it's a sign on your forehead and your hand that the law may be in your mouth, that you may teach it, right? If it's not in your mouth, you can't teach it. So what they're doing here by the drunkenness of the wine is they're forgetting the law. Not only forgetting the law, but they blaspheme against the law. They speak against it, right? They're crucifying it, and they're saying that we're above what God has given. We're above what God has declared holy, right? And so it's putting themselves in a position above all that is called God. Now, I want to look at this subject because Spirit of Prophecy has some really interesting statements on this. And it's easy to kind of overlook some of it, so that's why I want to look at it. The highest earthly authority, she speaks about at the end of time, during the time where there's like this really, really difficult, hard-pressed time for the saints, there's going to be a serious conflict here. And there's going to be a death decree issued by a governing body that is actually a body. There is this kind of authority to sort of legislate this throughout the world. Early Writings, page 282 says, "Then I saw the leading men of the earth consulting together, and Satan and his angels busy around them. I saw writing, copies of which were scattered in the different parts of the land, giving orders that unless the saints should yield their peculiar faith, give up the Sabbath, and observe the first day of the week, the common good," right? If you're not in line with the common good, you need to perish. The people were at liberty after a certain time to put them to death. But in this hour of the trial, the saints were calm and composed, hallelujah, trusting in God and leaning upon his promise. that a way of escape would be made for them. Wow, that's a really good promise. But okay, notice the leading men of the earth are consulting together. The next statement says that the decree has been passed by the highest earthly authority, that they shall worship the beast and receive his mark under pain of persecution and death. May God help his people now, that they can do, for what can they do then in such a fearful conflict without his assistance? God help us to have this help. But what is this highest earthly authority? Well, prophecy reveals this in Revelation chapter 17. The highest earthly authority is really, really well, I think it's well substantiated in the Bible. I've done presentations on this before, but I'm going to take a slightly different angle on it. Revelation 17 verses 1 and 2. It says, "And there came one of the 7 angels, which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come here, and I'll show you the judgment of the great whore, which sits upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication." The fact that it's the judgment of the great whore signifies the fact that there was a judgment already taking place. Before God will execute the judgment, there needs to be the process of making a judgment, right? So that means that this time that John is seeing must be after the hour of his judgment, which is laid out in Revelation chapter 14, verse 6. Okay? So we have to understand that the time period of the hour of his judgment, it must be following this period when the judgment of the great whore is judged. Okay, so I'm going to show you this judgment, and I'm going to show you why she's judged. That's the whole basis of the vision. We know that this power, without question, it's unquestionably the scarlet harlot of Revelation. You could see a little banner that I made several years ago now. But I just, I thought it was so striking that this woman has all of these colors and all of these features. It says the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet colored and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, Mother of harlots and abominations of the earth, And it's like, okay, you say it's not Catholicism. Well, it's just a very unfortunate thing that it looks so much like Catholicism the way that it's described in Revelation 17. That's what I would say to that. Because that's entirely the colors that they are decked out with, like all the time, right? So it is so. It is that way. The highest officials of the church are arrayed just as this woman is arrayed. And they use a golden cup for every communion service in every church of the land. The prophecies of the 7 mountains are also found in here. We'll read verse 9 through 14. It says, "And here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains." Now, remember, she's sitting on a 7-headed dragon. Okay, scarlet-colored beast that you find. It's actually called Satan, 7-headed beast with 10 horns, found in Revelation chapter 12. And so the 7 heads, so there's a woman sitting on the dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns. And now that fact that it has 7 heads, they are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. Now 7 mountains signifies kingdoms in Bible prophecy. And it says, "And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not and is the 8th, he is even the 8th, that is the whole beast, that is Satan, right? He is even of the 7 and goes into perdition. And the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and they shall give their power and strength to the beast." So these are kings that are yielding up their power so that they can be kings. They're yielding, they're giving their power over so that they can reign in a very special sense in this last sort of phase of Earth's history. It says, "These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. Just check here. Sounds like I got a message. Looks like it's okay. I don't know if hopefully the sound is coming through all right. But I don't see any messages to the contrary, so I will just assume that that's the case. When we look at the 7 kings, it says 5 are fallen, 1 is and the other has not yet come, and when he comes he must continue a short space. Now, I've done presentations already about the beast in Bible prophecy and how God uses the symbolism of those nations, and specifically having religious connotations to signify the fact that this is the beast. It uses that kind of symbolism. And so you can see that on the wall of Ishtar. Ishtar had her throne on a lion, much like the woman has her throne. The spiritual Babylon has her throne on this dragon. Now, what are the 5 that are fallen? Well, it starts with what's on her head, right? Well, what was the head of the kingdoms found in Daniel chapter 2? It was the kingdom of gold, Babylon, right? And that's on her head as well. And so it just so happens that ancient Babylon, these are all these big, massive kingdoms that have something to do with apostasy, okay, or world dominions in some form or fashion. So you have Babylon, then you have Medo-Persia, Greece, pagan Rome was the next one. And all of the years of their fall, by the way, are listed underneath them, except for the one that is. Papal Rome falls in 1798. So you all probably are familiar with that and the widespread dominion that all of these kingdoms had. Now, when we look at the one that is, it has to be definitely in the judgment period, so after 1844. Not only after 1844, but it also has to be revealing this concept of the woman sitting on the beast, right? It's the Catholic Church. It's not necessarily the daughters of the Catholic Church. It's not the Protestants that are apostate. It's not necessarily America because it's sitting on waters. And the waters, we're told about beasts that come out of water. We're told America came up out of the earth. So in this case, it's actually the European Union. The European Union was established in 1957 by the Treaty of Rome on the hill Capitolina. It was one of the 7 hills of Rome anyway, but it was the Capitolina Hill, yeah. And has very significant history for Constantine and for the Catholic Church. And so they signed the Treaty of Rome, and that's basically what started the European Union. Most people don't realize that. Now, then there's one that has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short space, and these have one mind, and they give their power and their strength to the beast, and it says that they rule 1 hour with the beast, right? Well, this is because it concerns all the nations of the earth. It is the United Nations. The United Nations, as of yet, though, has received no political power. It is an NGO, although that's quickly changing. It is not going to be a non-governmental organization for long because they already have an international court. They already have a security council. They already have a number of things where they're getting the nations to essentially give their strength and their power over so that they can have a kingdom for a short space. And they're united. They have one mind. All right? Now, one is certainly using the symbolism of the European Union. It's unescapable. There's all the members of the European Union Parliament. I mean, I think that's pretty clear when you look at this. They're all there, and then there's some honorary members that were past members of the commission. They happen to be Jesuits, if you want to know who they are. very, very staunch Catholics, and have really been steering the Catholic or the European Union in the favor of the Catholic Church and its teachings. If you look at you just look at the coins. I mean, it's pretty. These are called euros. That's the kind of currency that is used in the European Union. It's the United States of Europe, essentially, and you see the woman riding on the beast, right? So the symbolism is all there. Symbolism is a bull, by the way. We're going to look at that in another presentation, because that is very esoteric, what they've done there. Because that bull is very significant, not just of the kings of the earth, but it's also signifying the beast, the eighth beast, which will come, which is going to be the Antichrist, the manifestation of the false Christ, that's going to sort of reign over all these religions and make one sort of worldwide unified religion, or at least push for it. Satan appearing and is converted after the modern order of things, right? Working many undeniable signs and wonders and things like this. Okay, the United Nations, can it be that this is the body of the leading men of the earth that consult together? And is this the highest earthly authority that essentially the various governments give their strength and power over to become a consolidated, united, one kingdom to fulfill the purposes and ends of the Catholic Church? Is it possible? I think it's very possible, and I think it's something that we need to realize, because it's very clear that how extensive this woman is going to have authority, the papacy, is over all the nations and the kings of the earth that have committed fornication with her. So the kings of all nations, well, where are all the nations? All the nations are going to be in these 10 kings, or under these 10 kings that receive power. They have dominion for only a short space of time. Well, what if you see this kingdom is actually coming rapidly, and you look at this, all these meetings with the Pope addressing and leading out in the United Nations addresses. And by the way, if you look at the speeches, they were very, their tone was very pacific at first, very kind of like conciliatory and soft. And now they're getting much more fierce and demanding and harsh, because, well, they think they've got the upper hand, right? The watchword of the United Nations is peace and security. Now, interestingly enough, when the word asphalia in Greek means security, and it says when they are saying peace and safety, that word is asphalia, okay? So when they are saying peace and security, then sudden destruction comes upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall in no wise escape, okay? So, peace and safety. When you understand that the United Nations is using this as like their main sort of theme, it's, at least for me, it's pretty interesting. I will show you. Let me see if I can find it. See if I can find this here. Oh, you know what? I'll go to the next section and then I'll show you. This is Albert Pike. Albert Pike was the Grand General of the Scottish Rite Freemasons, and he had a very, very high influence. He was actually essentially the high priest, as it were, of Masonry. And I don't like getting into all of the the initiated secrets of the elites and their religion, but sometimes it is necessary to bring some of those things out. And that which is spoken in darkness shall be proclaimed upon the rooftop. I think that some of these things God allows to leak so that we can understand it. Now, not everything is a genuine document. We need to verify all this information. But I know, actually, I remember reading some documents like this. Some of these are very genuine documents. And we shouldn't, well, you know, the Bible is our rule of authority anyway. But when you look at the trajectory, all of these things are very much happening, and we have a lot of witnesses to testify to the facts of these things. Now, this is written in the Instructions to the 23 Supreme Councils of the World, written from Albert Pike. Again, he's giving the marching orders to all of the Masons, all of those who are involved in sort of this. And we're going to see how he laid out what his beliefs were, what his affirmation was, and how he lays out a path for 3 world wars, and what the outcome was for the highest world authority, and how the United Nations is going to become a global or one world government. Now, he says this: that which we must say to a crowd is, we worship a God, but it is the God that one adores without superstition. To you, sovereign grand inspectors general, we say this, that you may repeat it to the brethren of the 32nd, 31st, and 30th degrees. The Masonic religion should be, by all of us initiates of the high degrees, maintained in the purity of the Luciferian doctrine. If Lucifer were not God, would Adonai, whose deeds prove his cruelty, perfidy, and hatred of men, barbarism, and repulsion for science, would Adonai and his priests culminate him? Yes, Lucifer is God. And unfortunately, Adonai, that is our God, right, is also God. You see why I don't want to read this on Sabbath, right? I mean, it's just insulting. For the eternal law is that there is no light without shade, no beauty without ugliness, no white without black, for the absolute can only exist as 2 gods. And the true and pure philosophical religion is the belief in Lucifer, the equal of Adonai, which is not true, but they believe in a system of equality, that Lucifer is just as much God by merit of what he did. But Lucifer, God of light and God of good, is struggling for humanity against Adonai, the God of darkness and evil. And that is, by the way, that is Jehovah. So pretty alarming, really. Now, this was a letter that Albert Pike wrote to the Italian Prime Minister, Giuseppe Mazzini. This was in 1871, and it was leaked by a Canadian military or naval general when these things came into his hands, and he had verified it with another high-level Freemason, and anyway, it came out. And then he published a book against Freemasons. The letter of Albert Pike to Giuseppe Mazzini: the First World War must be brought about in order to permit the Illuminati to overthrow the power of the Tsars in Russia, and making that country a fortress of atheistic communism. So, First World War, we know that what happened as a result of this was that in 1917, that the Tsars, which were like the kings in Russia, they were like the Caesars in Rome. Okay, the Tsars in Russia, they fell. That was the last Tsar, and then you have, of course, the Soviet Union being established. It says the divergences caused by these agents of the Illuminati between the British and Germanic empires will be used to foment this war. That also is true. At the end of the war, communism will be built and used in order to destroy the other governments and in order to weaken the religions. Okay, so understand that at that time, after 1917, there's going to be a great decline in spirituality. Well, that makes sense. Is my camera still on? Yeah, it is. Okay. Now, and there has been a great decline in the 1900s. Up until now, that decline has come to a kind of an astounding, the crescendo, I guess, the really high point of the foolishness of humanity, where humanity has. I mean, when they're saying, well, we don't know what a man is, you ask them what a man is, and they don't know what a man is, and you say, well, what's a female? What's, and, oh, well, and what are you? Well, I mean, you could say that, you're a monkey, which is what pretty much people are saying anyway, by their ideology. And that would be perfectly acceptable. And maybe it's that theology that has actually gotten them to, that theory that has gotten them to this place. I don't doubt that. Okay. So to weaken the religions. Now, what was the result of this? Let's look at this. I'm gonna shift the camera for you. I'm gonna go back to this, but we're gonna look at what the results were for World War I. I have a World War I tab here, right? So this is the official United Nations page. Okay, the United Nations office at Geneva. And so this is concerning the League of Nations. Well, the League of Nations was established, it says, from 1920 to 1946. Well, when was the United Nations established? It was 1947. It was the successor to the League of Nations, which failed, by the way. The League of Nations was the first intergovernmental organization established to promote international cooperation and to achieve international peace and security. Well, that sends alarm bells already, because, means sudden destruction is imminent. It is often referred to as the predecessor of the United Nations. The founding document, the Covenant of the League of Nations, was drafted during the peace negotiations at the end of the First World War. At the end of the First World War. And I would look at these videos, but I just don't really have the time to do that. But you can see all these things online. It's all there. It's nothing hidden. But very interesting that they started this process of globalization, right, with a covenant of a League of Nations where the nations should band together for international peace and security. Well, wouldn't it be something if all nations would do that? Not just all nations, but that they actually began to take on sort of a legislative authority. Now let's go back to the slideshow. And I know that one was brief, and it was brief, but we're going to look at the next one, which I think is pretty interesting, World War II. It says the Second World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences between the fascists and political Zionists. That's the Nazis, by the way, and the political Zionists being the Jews in Germany. Okay, they're very. You look at the Ashkenazi Jews; they're pretty political as well. This war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed and that the political Zionism be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel in Palestine. Why do they want communism? Why do they want a state of Israel? That was the goal of World War II, to have, who actually is the one that facilitates them becoming a sovereign state in Israel. It was the one who divided Palestine was the United Nations, which they had made as a result of World War II, because, well, hey, the League of Nations failed to stop the Second World War, which was planned, so they need to take more fierce reforms. So they reformed the system of the League of Nations, and they made the United Nations. How useful. During the Second World War, international communism must become strong enough in order to balance Christendom, which would be then restrained and held in check until the time when we would need it for the final social cataclysm. Understand something. Russia and communism and atheism has a purpose. in the last scenes before this great kingdom is coming sort of to fruition. And it's going to have everything to do with World War III. Russia is going to be one of the key players. Israel is going to be one of the key players. The state of Israel is going to be at the heart of these matters. Christendom needs to be balanced by international communism. So it's not just communism in Russia, it's also worldwide. But here's the thing. Christendom is a kingdom of Christianity. Well, how is communism or atheism restraining Christendom? Well, it's stopping everyone wants to support Donald Trump, and I'll tell you something. He's the one that got Albert Pike when the rioters were throwing down all these statues. He personally ordered specifically Albert Pike's statue to be put back in place. Specifically Albert Pike's. Now, Christendom is a kingdom of Christianity that is basically being restrained and repressed by the forces of atheism, however that looks. In America, evangelical, right, when you get church and state. You look at the European Union. The European Union was started by Catholics for the purpose of banding themselves together to protect themselves in a trade agreement so that Russia, which was coming and advancing into Eastern Europe, would not overtake them. That's the secret about the European Union. And they wanted to preserve their Catholic social teachings and religion. And they believed that the European Union should be for that. In fact, if you look at the flag, the 12 stars, right? That was inspired by a statue of Mary, which has 12 stars on her head. And Arsene Heights was the one who was inspired, and he designed the flag. And she was arrayed in blue, and she was standing on the earth, and she had 12 stars, so he made a flag after Mary. So the European Union is thoroughly Catholic, by the way, and it's Christendom. Let me go back. What was the results? Let me just show you what the results were. I jumped too far ahead. Let me go here. We're almost finished here. I don't want to go into all of it today. I'll go into 3 world wars today. But the United Nations, again, official page. What is their watchword? To maintain international peace and security. When did international peace and security need to be defended? In the League of Nations. When did they want to maintain it? In the United Nations. How did the United Nations begin? The United Nations was created in 1945, so they basically jumped ship off the League of Nations to go into a more exalted system of governance. Global governance. The United Nations was created in 1945 following the devastation of the Second World War, with one central mission: the maintenance of international peace and security. It's funny how it came at that time. You would almost think that they planned it. Okay, and just so you know, like, again, they have history of the United Nations, big United Nations building being built there, by the way, quite impressive in New York. It says, as World War II was about to end in 1945, nations were in ruins and the world wanted peace. They proceeded to draft and to sign, in 1945, sorry. They proceeded to draft and then sign the UN Charter, which created a new international organization, the United Nations, which it was hoped would prevent another world war, just like the one they had just lived through. Well, what happens if they planned already a third world war and they said, well, we're hoping this, but we know that we planned a third one, so I'm not sure how well that's going to be. What's the third world war that they're planning on doing? What's the purpose of this? Now remember, the United Nations is still working to maintain international peace and security. They're priming people for sudden destruction, and the point is to uphold international law. Okay, there is a purpose. We're going back to World War III now. Stay with me. Don't fall asleep. I know that this is getting long. We're just going to go through World War III and make a point. The Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agentur, the agents of the Illuminati, between the political Zionists, that is the state of Israel, and the leaders of the Islamic world. You know that that is happening now, right? You can see that that's going on with Hamas. But, you know, there's also the element of atheism and communism in Russia that has to all be, you know, all is kind of playing in their part in this as well. Let's continue. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam and the political Zionism, which is the state of Israel, must mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. Notice something. They want to bring down the economy. That's the plan. That's the goal. All right? They want to bring it down morally because that way they can establish a new moral order based on the law that they want. Right? They want to drive it to a place where it's so far away from God and his morality, so far from the Spirit to enshrine iniquity, and so economically exhausted so that they can institute essentially a police state, right? Where everything is recorded, every transaction, every movement of every fund, where you can't do anything without being seen, heard, known about, and you're being watched. And you're not being watched by humans. You're being watched by super intelligent, artificially intelligent robots that are able to scan all of your conversations in a moment of time, and you could be arrested in a quick moment. No problem at all. Then it says this: we shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which in all of its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and the most bloody turmoil. They're saying, listen, we're going to just totally let all of the atheism get absolutely crazy, absolutely lawless, where men are going to think they're women, women are going to think they're men, they're going to try to change themselves, or you're going to be able to have abortions up till, you know, the day of the birth, the day before birth. You're going, right, full-term abortions. You're going to be able to, right, the children in the education system are going to be taught, they're going to be taught sex education. They're going to be taught that they can choose their gender, or they can have no gender at all. They can be non-binary, right? When you look at these things, the goal is to get a people that want morality. They want a change. And they're looking to establish something. They're saying, when the time comes, at the time appointed, when we don't need atheism anymore, it's served its purpose, we're going to just absolutely unleash it upon the world in a way that people are going to realize how silly it is. Right? And when they realize how silly it is, they're going to look for some kind of ideal. They're going to look for some kind of moral standard. Even Richard Dawkins is looking for that. Richard Dawkins, I mean, really, but he's not the only one. There is some, you've got Bill Maher, you've got a whole bunch of other very strong atheists, and they're saying the same thing. Then everywhere, the citizens obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitude, disillusioned with Christianity. Whoa, what do you mean? It means that they're going to make them become essentially Christian, right? Whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, because they just destroyed Israel in the Third World War, right? And anxious for an ideal, but not knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer. By the way, that word universal is an esoteric way of saying Catholic. Brought out in the public view. The manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement, which will follow the destruction of Christianity, as true Christianity, and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. They don't want atheism. They don't care about atheism. It's only part of it's just a pawn. Your pawn's in the game, and this is also just, you know, one of the many chess pieces that it's playing to sort of control the whole show. Now, when we look at World War III, so we looked at what was the result of World War I. The results of World War I think, was pretty evident, right? League of Nations. It was a global effort for the nations to band together. But then you have the United Nations again. Well, now there's a third World War coming up, and the United Nations is not doing a very good job stopping it. What do you think they have in place to change that? Could it be a 2030 agenda? Let's look at this. I'm going to show you. Okay, let's look at United Nations reform. That's where we'll look here. We could look at the Great Reset, I guess. But yeah, let's look at the Great Reset. Let's do that. So hopefully you can hear this. Uh-oh. No, I don't like that. Just one moment. Sorry about that. Let me just make sure that you can hear this and not hear me. I want to make sure that on the window, you're actually able to hear. I'm not sure that you'll be able to hear unless I put the... Yeah, I think you'll be able to hear. Just one moment. I'm going to mute myself as you watch this. Wait, that's not working.
However,
one moment.
we do.
I will make sure. I don't know what is going on. I don't know why you're not able to hear that. But let's try. Where is the main sound coming from? It should be here. Let me try this. Definitely not that. That was really bad. Okay. Sorry about that. I don't mean to disturb you, especially if you have children in the home. That would be incredibly disturbing. Okay.
The global energy systems, food systems. And more relevant than ever. What is also needed is a summit like this one to go beyond crisis. History is truly at a turning point. We do not yet know the full extent and the systemic and structural changes which will happen. However, we do know that global energy systems, food systems and supply chains will be deeply affected. In times of crisis, the role of governments is more important and more relevant than ever. What is also needed is a summit like this one to go beyond crisis management and to look into constructive ways we can build our common future.
So let me just make sure it's not starting another video here. I think it's pretty clear what he was just saying, but just one second. I don't need that page. Oh no, it's messing up all my tabs now. Why? I don't know why it's doing that. Okay. You're going to see everything that I'm going to share with you. At least not today, but eventually I will share. Actually, I missed some of these things, which are totally talking about Europe and how it's advancing the Catholic agenda. I'm not going to talk about that now. I could talk about it some other time, I guess. Let me see here. Let me go back to where I was. Okay, so World War III. What are the results of those things? When you look at what Klaus Schwab was saying, he was at the World Government Summit. The World Government Summit. You can't make that up. It is having some of the most prestigious world leaders and rich men that are on the face of the planet. And they're in conference for of course, the global reset, especially after this coronavirus. They're certainly leveraging that and talking about the economy and talking about all the various changes that must happen to take control of the rising shift in the times that are all orchestrated, and they know that something decisive is right around the corner. So they're not even hiding it anymore. So when we look at this, I'm going back to my screens so you can see World War III and what I was talking about here. Speaking about the United Nations here, look at what the Pope says here. It says Pope Francis and the need for a more effective United Nations. In his speeches to the United Nations, as well as in Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis has always encouraged a reform of the UN to give real concreteness. You know, concrete is solid, by the way, giving a real foundation to the concept of a family of nations, at the same time urging greater efforts towards multilateralism. Okay, I don't know if I highlighted anything here. I didn't. There's a lot of interesting things in here, but I didn't highlight anything. So I'm just going to keep moving on. But the idea is that, like, he wants reform because he's saying, like, you guys are useless. You're not able to do anything, right? It says, in the current war in Ukraine, remember when they say, oh, you failed your objective for which you were formed, you need to be reformed again, right? From the League of Nations to the United Nations. Well, United Nations can't do it. We need something stronger. We need something harder. In the current war in Ukraine, we are witnessing the impotence of the organizations of the United Nations. Pope Francis' words yesterday at the general audience have echoed widely. No less relevant, however, are the words that immediately preceded the statement. Indeed, they are the premise of the bitter observation. After World War II, the attempt was made to lay the foundations of a new era of peace. But unfortunately, we never learn, right? The old story of competition between the greater powers went on. So, what is the goal here? It says Pope Francis has repeatedly made gestures and words in support of the United Nations, encouraging a process of reform that is requested in particular by those countries, by those people who suffer the most in consequence to the powerlessness to which the Pope referred. Now, we know that in 2015, the Pope spoke at a UN General Assembly and gave each a copy of Laudato Si, by the way. That was the marching orders for the new climate change agenda, the 2030 agenda. The Pope affirmed that reform and adaptation to the times is always necessary in the pursuit of the ultimate goal of granting all countries without exception a share in and a genuine and equitable influence on the decision-making process. Okay, that's a little bit wordy, but really what they're saying is, like, there needs to be more power in the Security Council. There needs to be more mechanisms in place that can deal with issues in a way that they can penalize the nations, they can punish them, right? And so this is the idea, is that he's actually proposing a government. Now, it says that this idea was in this encyclical Fratelli Tutti. Now, let me just go up there and I'll show you what some of the really startling statements in this. I might be going totally the wrong way here, but I did highlight it. So where are you? Yeah, I went, that's what I thought. I went totally in the wrong direction. Okay, there we go. I saw something. It says this: the 21st century is witnessing a weakening of the power of nation states, chiefly because the economic and financial sectors, being transnational, tend to prevail over the political. Given this situation, it is essential to devise stronger and more efficiently organized international institutions with functionaries who are appointed fairly by agreement among national governments and empowered to impose sanctions. When we talk about the possibility of some form of world authority regulated by law, we need not necessarily think of a personal authority. Still, such an authority ought at least to promote more effective world organizations equipped with the power to provide for the global common good. That is the Catholic social teaching. The elimination of hunger and poverty and the sure defense of fundamental human rights. In this regard, I would also note the need for a reform of the United Nations organization and likewise of economic institutions and international finance so that the concept of the family of nations can acquire real teeth. What does real teeth look like? Iron teeth. Iron teeth that it can devour and break in pieces everything that that stands in its way, right? The great iron teeth on the beast. Now, let's see. Was there anything else here? I think there was a few points here that I put, but I don't know how pertinent they are. But they definitely talk about this idea of world government. But I don't. Maybe I lost the highlights. Oh well. I'm not going to cry over that. So let's look here. All right. You know what's going on here? Pope Francis may visit the United States in September after the United Nations invitation. He said, yeah, 2015. No, 2004. 2024. 2004 was 20 years ago. 2024. So Pope Francis is reportedly considering returning to the United States in September to speak before the United Nations General Assembly. Now, he would be doing that just a month before the day of the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, let's continue. I just highlighted the relevant points. It says, the September summit objective is to strengthen the structures of the United Nations and global governance to face more fully the new and old challenges in the coming years, the UN has said. The meeting will lead to a pact for the future, to advance rapidly toward realizing the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. That means they are trying to make a global government and trying to do this sort of to give it real teeth by 2030. If they fail to prevent a World War III, you can be certain that the United Nations is going to take on kind of a new, exalted, legislative kind of form. United Nations, Department of Economic and Social Affairs, that there was an international conference on global governance and development issues for a shared future. This is a speech. It says that that somebody was speaking on global governance and development issues, pretty clear. Now it says, it has many implications for global government, speaking about the adoption of the Universal 2030 Agenda. Okay? Has many implications for global governance. Now, I won't go too far into this, but I do want you to at least see something of it. The implementation starts at a national level, but international policies and economic trends have a critical impact. This is where global governance comes in. Effective global governance that takes into account the economic, social, and environmental dimensions that can help us achieve Agenda 2030. Global governance will be essential to achieving the targets that require concerted international action. For example, targets on increasing the voice and participation of developing countries in the global decision-making. Global governance can help us and implement to address issues where we need to foster and implement new and existing international laws and treaties. The United Nations can become a locus for such global governance. You rightly say that the global governance must be governed by the principles of justice, fairness, transparency, and equalities. The United Nations is governed by these principles. It is the United Nations where every country has equal representation. No other international body, be it the international financial institutions or the informal country groupings, had such a broad ownership. This will immensely benefit the legitimacy of any kind of global governance mechanism. With the normative power and the related agenda-setting influence, the United Nations can serve as a platform for governments to initiate new areas for global governance. Well, how do they do that? They have to give their strength and their power politically over to the beast. They have to become the seventh head of the dragon. You can only if they're willing to give up their individual sovereignties to have a head over them, a worldwide government, will they end up having this kind of a situation. That's exactly what they did, by the way, in the European Union. All of those kingdoms before, they were all kings that were over other nations. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, Papal Rome, all powers that were reigning over other nations. And so, of course, that's why the European Union fits so well into that model, and why the United Nations is going to fit in exactness towards that very thing. So that will counter that by saying that Agenda 2030 just showcased what UN member states can achieve with the right determination and political will. Remember, His will, God's will be fulfilled when in them giving their strength and power over to the beast. And then they hate the harlot. Actually says they hate the whore. Okay, what was this? This was Laudate Deum. Okay, it's also speaking about the same thing. I don't think I need to get into this, but the weakness of international politics. All right, I'm just going to scroll here, and you can go to this video. You can actually read this yourself. You can just pause it and read it. And if you want, the link it's on the Vatican website, Laudate Deum, right? But the idea is that he's talking about a reform of governments. He's talking about a more effective world organization equipped with the power to provide for the global common good. All right? So it's all here. It's all pretty alarming. He's talking about some form of world authority regulated by law. So it's very similar to what we just read. And that, yeah, it's pretty startling. Okay, last point, I think Laudato Si. Look at what it says in Laudato Si, and I think this is where we will close this out. Obviously, the United Nations has a lot to do with this. Why is it figuring so largely in this question if the people don't realize that prophetically it's on track to become the next this next United Nations body is going to become a legislative body as they do that. Common good. Let's see. Here we go. Enforceable international agreements are urgently needed since local authorities are not always capable of effective intervention. Global regulatory norms are needed to impose obligations and prevent unacceptable actions. International and regional conventions do exist, but fragmentation and the lack of strict mechanisms of regulation, control, and penalization end up undermining these efforts, like when you break the common good. When you don't go with the agenda of the Catholic Church. What is needed, in effect, is an agreement on systems of governance for the whole range of the so-called global commons. We already read this. I think it was quoted already, but it says, as Benedict has affirmed, in continuity with the social teaching of the Church, to manage the global economy, to revive economies hit by the crisis, to avoid any deterioration of the present crisis and the greater imbalances that would result, to bring about integral and timely disarmament, food security and peace, to guarantee the protection of the environment, and to regulate migration. For all this, there is urgent need of a true world political authority, as my predecessor indicated some years ago. That's a mouthful. And this is what they're going for. I mean, this is the whole aim. This is the whole thing that they're trying to do right now, is to bring about, this sort of great and mighty reform. So this was only like half of the presentation. It was like 2 hours long, so it's long enough. But if this was something that has stirred your thinking a little bit, and if you want me to sort of maybe do more videos on these themes during midweek, let me know, and I can certainly do that. But I know that these are a dime a dozen. People, there are better teachers than I that deal with these themes. So, but if you would like that, I could, in maybe this less formal kind of way, share sort of some thoughts as I'm understanding them coming to light on the world stage. I can certainly gather my thoughts together in a presentation, and tabs and whatever else, and videos, and share them as I have them. Not necessarily always every week, but I could certainly do that if that's something that people are interested in. All right. With that being said, I would like to close in prayer, and we must be ready, because this show is just about over. And if we're not ready now, and if we're not getting ready, we're not going to be ready, because the crisis is coming at rapid fire pace. I mean, it's so rapid now, it's hard to keep up with all of the trends and developments and everything that's going on. There's so many different things, and there's so many different things that it's bombarding you to the point where you don't really discern how serious some of those things really are. So we want to walk in the light so that we can discern in the light what is going on in the darkness, not so that we study the darkness, but that we perceive and we understand, and we want no part of it. It's not amenable to us, because our kingdom is of another world. Okay, with that, let's pray, and then I close out. Merciful, loving Father, we want to thank you so much for giving revelations and light, and giving us Bible prophecy, declaring the end from the beginning, and the things which have not yet come to pass, that when they do come to pass, we can know that you are He who declared them from the beginning. You declared them before these things. Thank you so much, Father, for this. Help our hearts, Father. Save us from worldly conformity. Save us from a love for darkness. And I know even, Father, some of these things are not things we need to feast on. We need to be feasting on your word. We need to be feasting on the light of your truth, making your law our meditation, considering and beholding the beauty and the glory as shining in the face of your Son, and that we become transformed by the power of your Spirit. Please, Father, give us your Spirit, your most Holy Spirit, to transform our lives, to anoint us, and to bring us higher than we can bring ourselves, so that our desires, our thoughts, our feelings, our motives are all brought into subjection because of the renewal of our heart and mind by the power of your working on us. We thank you so much. Father, we ask that you will hold the winds for the sake of your people, that they may be sealed with all the fullness of your Spirit. We thank you so much. In the name of your Son, Yeshua. Amen. All right, everyone. God bless you for those of you who joined. I appreciate you, and I hope that you learned something new, and that you are more ready now, because time is short. All right. God bless.